Number of senators, congressmen, hopefully some presidential candidates, well-known authors like Marianne Williamson and Neil Donald Walsh, Michael Lerner, who are talking about, how can we bring our values into politics? How can we find spiritually based solutions to social problems that Gordon was speaking about? And what are some of the new tools to create a more engaged citizenry? So things like conflict resolution, multi-stakeholder dialogues, victim-offender reconciliation. A lot of these tools have been very effective in creating a new politics, solving social problems. And as Gordon said, we do a lot of consulting and training in government agencies. We did a project last year for Department of Housing, examining their best practices. What were they doing that got people off of drugs, off welfare, develop self-sufficiency, prevent violence? And what are the principles that made those programs effective so they could replicate them? And of course, we found through all this research, visiting all these housing developments around the country, and wrote a whole guidebook on it. It's things like partnership, sustainability, inspiration, leveraging resources. All the sort of spiritual principles that we know about is what also made these projects effective. So we're finding ways to sort of input spiritual ideas and principles in some of the government agencies and nonprofit groups in Washington. And we have a lot of citizen dialogues on racial healing. We did a whole series on that, and on Y2K, finding common ground on environment and economic issues. So we invite the public in to talk about some of these different issues. Those are some of the things we're doing in Washington. Other questions?
Other? Yes.
This is going to be a really exciting evening. Before we get into the meat of the evening, I want to just a few details, two things that I want to tell you about. In the back of the room, you'll see a flyer for our next program. And those of you who are members of Islands, you'll get one of these in the mail in a few days. But if you're not, I really recommend this evening. Jim Garrison is going to be here. Jim Garrison is the founder of the State of the World Forum, which meets every year, and it's meeting this weekend in San Francisco. And he's coming in a few weeks to tell us about what the state of the world is, I guess. And also to tell us about what they're planning for the year 2000. They're going to be here in New York a year from now, earlier in September actually, along with the convening of the United Nations and all the world religious leaders, and just about everybody in the world is coming to New York, so look out. A year from now it's going to be a very busy time. But I recommend this. Jim is an amazing guy. What he's done is brought together world leaders from every background you can imagine. And so please put that on your calendar and show up on the 19th of October. There's another flyer at the back of the room, this purple one. And this is something that didn't get into our newsletter because we were only made aware of it after our newsletter had gone to bed in the summer. Roger Howson is an author, a Brit, and he's been in this country for a couple of years, and he spent a year traveling around this country, exploring what he could find, and as a result of that, he wrote a book called Sacred America. It's his 8th book, I believe. And but this book is a real celebration of this country and what he found and its the spiritual qualities all over this country. And he's going to be here on the 2nd of November, and he's a great performer, I'm told, by people who have heard him perform, reads Rumi poetry and other marvelous ecstatic poetry, and it's just wonderful to listen to. So I recommend that, and it's a small gathering, so if you're interested, you better get your registration in early because it's limited space. One other note I want to mention, in those of you who have seen our newsletter and or come to our programs, I need to tell you, and we'll put a notice out about this, so I need to tell you that the Advisors' Day that we had planned for the 4th of December, we have postponed for another year. What was happening, we were having problems with scheduling. Some of our advisors were having conflicts in their schedule. We have a wonderful day planned, and we will do it another time. In another year, but we have to postpone it for this December. So that is off the schedule, but we do have Roger, so that's good. One other thing I want to say before I introduce our speakers tonight is I want to just draw your attention to a brochure that you'll find also at the back of the room of a conference at the end of April in Washington that Gordon and Corinne are going to be putting on. It's called Reigniting the Spirit of America. Sounds good. Washington in April is great. Right?
One of the few good months.
It's a great month in Washington. Cherry blossoms. It's a little late for the cherry blossoms, but the azaleas are out. Okay. I think that's enough housekeeping for the evening, for the moment. But I want to tell you a little story as a way of introducing this evening. And this is just something that happened to me this weekend. And I think it speaks to what we're here for tonight. At least it does for me, so I hope it does for you. This past weekend, I was leading about 16, 17 people on a river trip, a canoe and a kayak trip in Connecticut. And on Saturday afternoon, we were coming down. It's not a very difficult, it's a whitewater trip. That means there are rapids and rocks and fast water. And we were coming down. I was paddling with somebody who hadn't paddled very much for a long time and therefore was really pretty rusty. But anyway, I wasn't paying attention. And the next thing I knew, we were pinned on two rocks. And what that means is that there were two rocks across the river, and our boat was stuck on those two rocks, and the water was filling it up pretty rapidly. And now I've been pinned before. There was usually somebody around to help me get out of that situation. And so we got out of the boat filled up with water, and that's like having a freight train coming at you. The force of the Housatonic River coming down into that boat filled with water was enormous. So I looked around, and everybody else on the trip had pulled off to the side of the river and was waiting for me to tell them what to do. And so I realized, okay, now not only have I created this problem, and I had tremendous temptation, I'll tell you, to make excuses for why I was there. I thought, well, my power didn't have any experience, that was going through my head, and she was overweight, and that made the boat unbalanced, and all these excuses are coming up. But then I realized that didn't really wash. I hadn't been paying attention to where I was going. I hadn't been paying attention to where I was going. So then it occurred to me that there was nobody going to rescue me because nobody knew how. And I've been on many rivers many times, but I've always had people there who knew a lot more than I did. And so when I got into trouble, I had people I could call on who just came and helped me out. This time, I had to orchestrate the rescue from the middle of the river on the rock and get the boat off before it wrapped around the rock, which can happen, and get myself and my paddling partner off safely. And we did it. But the thing that really, and an interesting thing happened in the process of doing that. It meant bringing some ropes out and attaching them and getting them to shore and wrapping them around a tree and hauling, and a whole lot of people hauling on the ropes and getting the boat off, and then we had to throw ourselves into the rapids and swim to shore. Anyway, what happened in all of that was that the people, these were beginners, people who didn't know how to paddle, people who had never been on a river, people who didn't know how to swim. I mean, there were all kinds of people there. But they all kind of pulled together. And they all got very connected to one another and feeling as though they were really doing something important. And they were. So that when it was all over, there was a tremendous sense of community and accomplishment and joyfulness. So I tell this story. I thought to myself afterwards, why did this happen this weekend? I've been leading that trip for years, and I've never done this before. And I thought maybe it was just preparation for tonight. Because it occurs to me that where we are now is in a place where we find ourselves kind of on a rock, you know, and the water's coming down and we don't know what to do about it, and no one's going to rescue us. It's up to us to figure out. There's nobody going to come out of the sky and rescue us, so it's up to us to figure out what it is we can do. And I know from this weekend that people who didn't seem to be able to do anything were able to do just the right thing. They really did. So I think that that's what we're here for, and is to really explore. We have two extraordinary people to help us, and I just tell you a little bit. I know you read your program, and you know that here are two people that understand what community really means. They founded a residential, intentional spiritual community in Massachusetts 30 years ago? 20 years ago. Okay, I made it a little longer, I'm sorry. 20 years ago. I've been there twice, and I know, and I've been to other intentional communities in different parts of the country, and I know that it is takes a lot of commitment and a lot of work to live in community with others and to build it from scratch. It's a huge task to do, and it takes all your inner and outer resources. So these are people who don't talk about community, they have lived it, experienced it in all of its wonders and all of its difficulties. And they also people who have traveled around the world and understand other cultures and other ways of looking at life. And they've just come back from working with world leaders and with the Dalai Lama. I thought that we could have two better people here tonight to help us understand where it is we're headed in the third millennium and how we can make this a very exciting challenge. So please would you welcome Corinne, McDoff, and Gordon Davidson. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Fions, and all of you for turning out tonight and being interested in what we might have to say. Do you want to say anything first?
Okay. Yes, just welcome everyone, and we're going to be trading off. Gordon's going to share some insights and inspiration, and then I'm going to come back on and share some other perspectives. And near the end of the evening, we'll actually have you break down into small groups and talk about community with each other. So we really want you to meet each other and connect and build a sense of community here as well. Okay, so Gordon's going to begin.
Okay, having just come back from Dharamsala, India, which was a trek to the foothills of the Himalayas, and when I say trek, I mean a 18-hour plane ride, and then a 3-hour train ride, and an 18-hour bus ride. It was a pilgrimage to get there. But what is so extraordinary to me about being back in the East again, having not been back there for quite a few years, is the emphasis that you find on the inner life, on the inner values, on what's going on inside of human beings. The absolute complement to what we have in the West, which is the emphasis on the outer life, on how we manage our world and our technologies and our banking and all our wonderful achievements in the outer world. And yet we don't pay a whole lot of attention to what's going on inside of human beings. We're beginning to a little more, but we still haven't really given that the focus it deserves. One of the most wonderful parts about being with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the other lamas, and he had most of his high lamas were there, and believe me, they don't call them high lamas for nothing. They really are extraordinary. And is when they talk about something and look at something, the first thing they consider is what is the motive in doing it? What is the intention in doing it? What is the expected outcome? How will this affect all sentient beings? I'm telling you, it's such a relief to be with people who think this way. in the West here, those kind of questions might be down at, number 5 on the list of priorities, if you see them at all. And it's just a complete balancing to what we have here. On the other hand, they haven't done a great job at managing their physical world. I mean, India is a mess. I mean, the pollution, the degradation of the environment, the degradation of the people is extraordinary. But at the same time, even within all that squalor, there is a tremendous amount of light and joy that comes out of people in the most extraordinarily poor conditions. That's what really amazed me. The theme of our trip was synthesis. A synthesis we had 8 different fields of human endeavor represented, including politics, religion, science, economics, art, culture, education, media, and we were all working and advising His Holiness on what's going on around the world to give him a broader perspective, and he was interacting with us about what he sees as some of the keys to the solution. And what I came away from that with is that as we enter the millennium, the key to entering the millennium, it is a pathway to changes in consciousness. We all tend to focus on, what is Y2K going to mean? Is my computer going to break down? Is the system going to break down? We're also focused still on our outer world, right? That's what we look at in the West. I mean, we're good at it. I mean, whatever you're good at, you want to do more of, right? But we're not so good at looking inside of ourselves and saying, well, where is my Y2K breakdown likely to happen? Where might I find places where my system's beginning to get a little shaky? Is this pace of life starting to wear me down? Is what I'm doing fulfilling my highest dream of who I want to be? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking ourselves as people, as Western people. We need to be asking those questions. That's why I really think the change that we move into the millennium with is going to be a change in focus. We are going to start to ask those questions much more profoundly, much more deeply, much more comprehensively than we ever have before. Questions like, what is the fundamental nature of a human being? One of the most wonderful teachings we got from the Dalai Lama was the idea that human beings are basically good. When people are ignorant or fearful or confused, they can do bad things. But basically human nature is good. That's why we're so shocked when we hear about terrible things in the news, because it violates our basic nature of who we are. Because it's such a shock to us, because it's not really who we are. It's a very interesting way of looking at what we see in our world. So if we are basically good, then what do we have to do to make that a reality in our experience? Well, the other question we can ask is, what does everyone basically want? And he says, and I agree, everybody wants to be happy. All human beings basically want to be happy. Now, we have very different ideas about what's going to bring us happiness. That's one of the problems. But he says, based on his experience and on the experience of religious and spiritual traditions all over the world, what makes one fundamentally happy is dedicating oneself to the well-being and happiness of other people. And in doing that, you become happy yourself. Because it is the joy of seeing other people brought to a higher level of understanding, of bringing them some kind of happiness or relief or joy, or helping them in whatever way you can, is the greatest thing you can do to bring yourself happiness. So it really resolves one of the fundamental paradoxes of life, which is, it is really in your highest self-interest to be selfless, which is a very interesting way of resolving that whole duality of, do I look out for me or do I think about other people? When we really realize that thinking about other people is looking out for you in the ultimate sense. So there's some very important realizations here that we can work with and we can think about in terms of this new pathway that I think we're going to go to in the new millennium. And I want to talk more about that But Corinne is going to share some ideas with you about change. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about change and the nature of change, because there's two types of change. One is the kind of change that happens to you. If something sort of landslides and hits you on the head and you go, oh my God, and you've got to respond to it some way. You're being acted upon, and so then you have to try to be flexible, try to find a good response, try to deal with it. The other type of change is the type that we actively, consciously engage in, where we're active, we're the change agent. Now the hard part is the first one. That's the one that we're always kind of reacting against, and there's been so much change in our world lately that we're sometimes feeling a bit overwhelmed between downsizing, losing our jobs, relationships changing, breaking up with loved ones, illnesses, moving to a new place. Just so many things are going on in our world. Technological changes that were supposed to make things easier and give us free time. How many of you have any extra free time from all the technology we have? Anybody? How many of you feel busier than ever in the last couple of years, right? Well, these changes are something we're trying to cope with a lot. And as Gordon mentioned, there's both the inner change that we need to make inside to respond to the outer changes, and then there's, of course, outer adjustments that we can make in where we live, or our relationships, or our job, or however we want to structure our life. So the one thing that's for sure is that everything is change. Change is the only constant, as they say. So change will challenge our current reality by shaking things up and allowing something new to come in. So we have to be flexible, and we can either respond to change in an evolutionary way, a positive evolutionary way. What would some evolutionary responses to change be? What would that look like? Something hits you, how can you respond positively? Anybody have any thoughts on that? And then we'll look at what's a regressive way to respond?
You can react openly and warmly instead of, let's say, angrily or hostilely.
Okay, openly and warmly rather than hostilely. Any other thoughts on what would be, yes?
Looks like use that as a teacher.
Use it as a teaching, something teaching us, yes, the change. How about regressive responses to change? What would that look like? Too much change, what happens when we regress? Yes.
Why me?
Why me? We feel like a victim, right? What else?
Panic.
Panic.
Run.
Yeah. Run. Drugs, TV, shopping. What else? Any other regress? I'm sorry?
Confusion.
Confusion. Okay. So we have a choice to respond in a positive way to make the inner changes so that the outer effects are not going to be so devastating, rather than feel like we're a victim. So, people, all of us, we tend to change more because we feel the heat rather than we see the light, right? Usually we feel the heat, the pressure, the tension of the change, rather than we see something new, we see the light, we see it as an insight, a teaching. So we need to focus more on how can change teach us? How can it be an opportunity rather than a problem? Because change is all part of the cycle of growth. There has to be destruction and a release of the old to clear the way for the new. We often forget that. We hold on to our familiar habits and patterns, hold on very rigidly, and forget that we need to sometimes just let go to clear the way so that we can create something new. We have to let go and create the space. So we have to shift from seeing crisis and change as a problem to seeing it as an opportunity. Here's an opportunity. okay? Rather than, oh my God, poor me, or run away. So how can we grow through the change? How can we see this dawning of a new millennium as an opportunity for growth and for change? So we have to explore what we fear the most. What is it that scares us about entering a new millennium? Think for a moment. What's scary about it? What do you fear? Any thoughts?
Eschatological entropy.
Entropy?
Yeah.
Okay. Things winding down, falling apart? Random.
Cosmic.
Okay. Random entropy.
Yeah.
What else is fearful about it?
Y2K.
Y2K, computer breakdowns. For a while there, we all thought we're not going to have our electrical systems or water or heat, right? Okay. What can be positive about it as we think about the future, as we think about the millennium? Cancellation of taxes. He's a real optimist. Other thoughts about the greater spirituality, because more people are waking up. More people are finding that a materialistic society is not enough, that we're stuck, we feel it's not enough. We want something more and deeper, and that's what's led us on this inner journey that many of us are on, to find a greater spiritual life, right? And I think that's the only way that we can really deal with these coming changes, is to begin to develop more proactive strategies to face the future, something more innovative, to anticipate change. There's going to continue to be technological change, economic change. A lot of people think that's scary. God knows, can the stock market keep going up, or are we going to have recession? Am I going to lose my job, or am I going to lose my savings? We have to be flexible to deal with what might be coming down the road, and try to see the big picture, okay? To see, what is, not just look at it in a little narrow way, my little piece of the action or my little life, but what's the bigger picture? What's the evolutionary perspective? And how is humanity growing and changing? Because this is a real opportunity that we're moving into. And I think many of us have been realizing how our own thoughts create our reality. Mind is a builder. So we have to see how our thoughts or our fears might bring a negative reality to us. And if this is a new idea for you, try a little experiment. Tomorrow, spend the whole day thinking very negative, being in a bad mood, being angry, just really getting into it. See what happens. Notice what happens. Do you get parking spaces easily? Does your bill suddenly come due? Does people yell at you? See what sort of reality you create when you get in a very negative mood. We often experience it. Just study it. Do it consciously. Notice what happens. Then spend the next day trying to be as positive as you can. Keep in a positive mood. See things as an opportunity rather than a problem. Expect the best. When you start getting fears, let go of them. Just stay in that positive, that positive frame of mind. And again, notice what happens for the day. We were traveling around the country on a book tour a few years ago, and I'll never forget, most of the time we had this great experience, but one day particularly I noticed we got in this horrible argument. We were fighting and yelling at each other as we're driving down the street, down the highway, and we're trying to find a hotel, and we were somewhere in the middle of the country. It's like everywhere we stopped, full, no vacancies. We kept getting off the freeway, we couldn't find anything. Finally, we found one of the well-known chains of motels had a vacancy. So we went in, and this was a fairly respectable motel. Finally got this room. Got into the room, and I couldn't believe it. They hadn't even changed the beds, cleaned the room, nothing. So Gordon had a dream that night, and the dream said, "Do you know why you got this room?" So it was like, that's probably rare that ever happened in that motel, but we drew it to us. And it was just like a stark message. So we have to be aware of how we're seeing the future, and keep focusing collectively on a positive view, a positive vision for the future. Spending time reflecting on what would we like our future to be? What is our highest vision for humanity? How can we start working more cooperatively, listen to each other, understand each other better, see how we can work as a whole family of humanity rather than separate parts always fighting each other? We have to look at what long-term good can even come out of short-term crisis. Rather than every time a crisis or problem happens, we focus on what's right in front of us. Look at the longer term. Look at the big picture. That gets us out of our stuckness. And I think that will really help us, move in a positive way towards the kind of new millennium that will be for all of us, not just us individually, because everything that happens is going to affect us all. We can't just create little islands of sanity or perfection in one place. Our realities are always impinging on each other. I'll never forget a friend of mine moved to Alaska, try to get away from horrible civilization, got a cabin way out in the boonies, right? So one day he's taking a walk and he finds this strange piece of metal or something unusual, and he went, wow, this is interesting. So he picks it up and finally a couple days later took it in somewhere to get it checked because he thought, where did this come from? So unusual. Well, it was a radioactive piece of metal that had fallen out of the sky from somewhere, and here it was right where he had moved, way out in the wilderness. It was like he couldn't get away from it. The greater reality will keep impinging on us. So it's like there's nowhere we can go that's totally safe. We have to make a better reality where we are. Now Gordon's going to continue and talk a little bit about some of the ways we can work with change.
Yes, change is very interesting. It's been said that the probability of change is equal to, 1, the level of discomfort we have with the way things are now. So we, yet in this country, probably don't have that much discomfort with the way things are. A lot of people are pretty happy with their lives if they're focused on the outer part of it, but the discomfort comes inwardly. People feeling dissatisfied, feeling like it's not really fulfilling, that they're not really having their life is not really what they want it to be. And that's where the discomfort is. The next thing you need to have a probability of change is an attractiveness of a vision for the future. In other words, we're never going to get people to change in this country unless we can give them something better to focus on. So when people have the vision that there is a way of life that may be a little bit simpler, but would be more rewarding and more fulfilling personally and inwardly, that will be attractive enough to help people change and move from what they're used to. Because we're all creatures of habit. We all love what we know. We want to have, and we're all very familiar with our food, just for instance, take our food. We like to have the food that we know. We like to have it, the way we're used to, and prepared in a certain way, and it makes us feel good when we have the food that we're familiar with. Well, there's so many things in our lives that are like that. Well, if you've ever been in another culture and you've moved outside of what you're familiar with, when I went to India 30 years ago in the Peace Corps, which was one of the formative experiences of my life, and I went and lived in an Indian village for 2.5 years, and I learned everything about an Indian culture. I learned how to eat the food, which was completely different from what I was used to. And I still recall I learned how to walk like an Indian, dress like an Indian, do all the whole lifestyle. And I learned to speak the language fluently. I was living in Tamil Nadu in southern India. And I remember one day I was walking down the village street talking to everyone, and I was looking at myself and I'm the perfect Indian. Look at this, I can do everything. I walk the walk and the talk and the game. I know the whole thing here. And I go, but but I'm not really an Indian. This thing here, all this I'm doing, this is just a bunch of learned behaviors. but I'm really an American. But wait a minute. Being an American is nothing but a bunch of learned behaviors too. Oh my goodness, if I'm just, all that's just learned behaviors, then who am I? Now isn't that an interesting question for a 23-year-old? That was when I really started asking myself, who are we in essence that transcends our cultural identity, that transcends all of what we've learned about who we think we are? And what I've learned over the years since then is that who we really are is something much more profound, much more vast, much more beautiful than any outer particular form it may take. It is beautiful as it comes through all the different cultures, but it is that essence, that spark of life, that spark of joy that comes through us, that is really the essential of what we all are, every one of us. So the work becomes, how can we encourage everyone to be who they are, that inner essence, to the maximum they can possibly be it in their culture, in their tradition. Because that's what makes beauty, what makes the life interesting and joyful to be part of. That's what I'm interested in doing. How can we do that? So, going back to change, in order to change, we also have to have a person's or group's previous success at change. You have to know that you can change successfully. So you have to have small changes. You have to do little things. You go out of your normal habit pattern and you change something a little different. Instead of going home and if you live in the suburbs and you roll up your garage door with your automatic garage door opener, and you drive in, you shut the door, and you never see your neighbors or talk to them. Perhaps it might be nice to walk around the neighborhood and say hi to some of the people you might see out jogging, or just get to know some of the people around you as a way to break out of the pattern, if that's your normal pattern. Or if your normal pattern is to be very gregarious and spend all your time talking to people, then maybe it would be very useful for you to go and sit and be quiet alone and perhaps meditate, or just tune into who you are completely on your own and find out more about you in that way. So it's changes, doing small things to go outside your normal patterns, and doing it consciously. When you do it as a self-chosen activity, it's very powerful because it allows you to express your intention to grow, to change, to use your will to be different, to expand your sense of who you are. That's really, really valuable. And the final thing in being successful at change is having a peer group or people around you who will support you in the change the way you want to go. And all of us want to be more loving, we want to be more open, we want to be more communicative, we want to be more caring of other people, and we want support for that. We want to be with people who reinforce that in us. We don't want people saying, oh, you don't want to be a bleeding heart, you don't want to be a pushover. People are going to walk all over you, make you into a doormat. There's a lot of cynicism in the world by people who've been hurt badly. And we want to find a way to reinforce those impulses in us by finding community with people who have the same intentions, who really want to be different. Because if anything is going to change in the new millennium, it is going to be the kind of people we are. I have a radical thesis on this. My radical thesis is we've already changed inside. There is probably a critical mass of people in this country who have already changed inside themselves, who already know what they need to express, what the society needs, how the culture needs to change. But many people are extremely frustrated at finding a way to express this in the current structures of the civilization that we have. The structures lag behind where we are in our growth in inner consciousness because they were created by a consciousness that was very different. Most of them are holdovers from an era, 100 years ago or more, and they don't express who we are anymore. We need structures of civilization that allow us to be in group, in loving group, that allow us to share our ideas as equals, that allow us to build consensus by recognizing every voice is precious and every voice has something to contribute. When you can hear through the pain and the sadness and all the rest of it and listen to the grain of truth in each person's voice. We need new ways to do this. Can you see doing this at a CEO board meeting? Can you see doing? Some are, a few of them are. It's hard to do it though. It's hard to do it at your local school board meeting. Right? I mean, these are the challenges that we face. But gradually, as these inner changes continue to grow in people, and they grow because the field itself is changing, the morphogenetic field, the field of consciousness around all of us is changing. And as more and more people go through this inner shift, it makes it easier and easier for more and more people to make this change. And it is happening like that everywhere. And as that goes on, we are going to see a continued and accelerating change in the structures of our civilization. They will become softer, more caring, more compassionate, more guided by higher purposes. My number one prediction for the next millennium is that we are going to start evaluating both our individual lives and the life of our organizations and our communities by one simple question. What purpose does it serve? What purpose does my life serve? What purpose does this organization serve? Is it a worthy purpose? Is it worthy of my life energy? Is it worthy of my commitment, of my sacred life commitment? And if not, can it be changed to be an organization that is worthy of that? Is it good enough for who we really are as human beings? And if it isn't, we either change it or we create a new one. That is how the new civilization is being born. It's happening already. There are changes, radical changes going on in the business community, in politics. New organizations are being created all the time. The younger generation is a wave with incredible ideas and incredible vision about what they want to see in the world. There is a lot happening, and it's going to continue and it's going to grow. And I'm excited about this time. I think we're in an extraordinary moment, what I call a hinge of history, what others have called a hinge of history, where as we go through the millennium and into the next whole new cycle, we're going to see a tremendous change in how we organize ourselves as human beings in our social order. And I look forward to being on the front lines of all of that. Okay. You want to?
So when we think of change, again, what is the opportunity? There's a wonderful quotation from the Ageless Wisdom which says, "In the destruction of form lies hid the secret of all evolution." In the destruction of form lies hid the secret of all evolution. When I saw that, I thought, So it's really saying, what are the forms that have to be destroyed in order for us to evolve? Now we can think about the old outworn forms of our institutions, the way we structure our personal life that needs to change, in terms of jobs, in terms of the way we, our style of our lifestyle, the way we eat. There are changes we need to make in our forms of our life and our institutions. But also think about it as forms of emotional and mental ideas. Our feelings. What are feelings we need to let go of? What are the forms of the ways we relate to people that have maybe gotten in the way of creating a new life for ourselves? Old patterns, old stuck ways that we need to let go of. maybe rather than being the one to always have all the answers and tell people everything, maybe we need to step back, listen a little more, listen more deeply, as Gordon said, to the grain of truth in many different viewpoints. In terms of ideas, mentally, a lot of us get really stuck there. Maybe I have an easy time letting go of physical things, but on the mental level, in terms of ideas, belief systems, we get stuck. We get rigid in our little boxes, our little beliefs. We hold on to things too tightly. So in the destruction of forms mentally as well lies hid the secret of our evolution. So what are the outworn ideas that we need to move beyond? Because it's also said that in the ageless wisdom that we have to cross the burning ground 3 times. The burning ground. I thought, now what is that? Well, think about physically, we have to let go of things. Emotionally, relationships, feelings, let go. Cross the burning ground is like crossing this fiery field. And if you experience that fiery change, where you just have to let go and trust and have faith in, you're going in the right direction, but you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what's coming in the future, but you have to be willing to let go. And mentally, you let go of old ways of thinking, but you don't really have a clear idea of what your new beliefs are, what your new understandings or insights. So we have to let go. And again, trust our inner wisdom, our inner knowledge. Now, when I read this, I didn't necessarily think that I had to take it literally, but Gordon and I had a real literal experience of this. 4 years ago, we had just written our book, Spiritual Politics, and we were about to go out on a book tour. A couple days later, we were in our spiritual community, this lovely spiritual community. We thought we were so safe there, it was so wonderful, ecological, all these wonderful solar homes that we built, and organic gardens, and composting toilets, windmills, all these wonderful things. Kind of created this safe environment there. Well, we were at a meeting, at a community meeting, and we left and went back up to our house. And Gordon opened the door of the house, and there was a fire. Somebody had started a fire in our house, a small fire. When he opened the door, it just exploded, and the flames just started engulfing the whole house. So I ran down to call the fire department, and he tried to get a hose to put it out. And it's like 5 minutes later, the whole house is up to the 2nd floor, this beautiful, wooden, made of wood, solar home that we had built ourselves, taken 3 years, was totally engulfed in flames. And if any of you have ever been through a fire, any major disaster like that, and I can really feel for the people with the floods now, in North Carolina, and people who've been through earthquakes, everything you've built, all your books, papers, research, clothes, photographs, family photos, everything. There it is. And we're standing there just watching this, because by this time there was nothing we could do. In fact, we called the fire department. We were in a rural area. It took them 15, 20 minutes to get there, and then a pump didn't work. The universe arranged it so that we definitely had to have this experience. So it's like we're sitting there watching this, and in our living room we had, this picture of St. Francis, and we had this Hopi sun god in this very interfaith, living room. And we had this beautiful stone statue of the Buddha. Well, the stone statue was right in the picture window, in the front window. And here it was with all the flames going up, and the Buddha sitting there serenely meditating. And you couldn't miss the lesson in this, because what did the Buddha teach? The impermanence of physical things, detachment from the physical plane. So we're just sitting there going, okay, I get it. Here it is. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a more clear picture that we had to let go of this beautiful solar home that we built, and this lovely spiritual community that we had started, 15 years earlier. We were the founders, and here was our wonderful home in this lovely community burning. So it took a few months to really try to meditate on and understand, why me? Why did this happen? What's this all about? And we finally learned that we had to let go, because it was like our self-will was saying, I want to be here back in our community, when our inner guidance, God was saying to us, you need to be in Washington, D.C. You need to take what you've learned there and bring it out into the mainstream. And that was why we had to let go. Not everybody has such dramatic experiences to learn to let go, but it really taught us how much we are attached to all this stuff. And it was interesting, everything we gave away came back to us. We had given away ideas and books and things we'd written, and even clothes and material things. A lot of things came back. People helped us out all over the country when we went out on a book tour. People helped us and gave us things, answering machines and computers and clothes and all this. So it was like what you share will come back to you. What you give away comes back. You get what you need. And we were well taken care of. And it was like, the interesting thing too was we had written this book about world events and understanding the symbolism of events in the world. What are we learning from events? Well, one of the major things, obviously, we had to learn was, what is the symbol of our house burning? What do we need to let go of and learn from to move on? And so we learned, I think, many deep lessons from that, about having faith, about learning, we never found out for sure who did it. We thought it was maybe some kids around the corner who bragged to their friends they did it, but we didn't know. We didn't know if somebody hated our book and was after us. But nothing else happened from that. So it was, I think, a major turning point for us in learning that, we can let go of stuff and everything will still be okay. We are not our stuff. We are not our things. So it's like what we've learned spiritually in responding to change and to crisis is, as Gordon was saying, find your deeper purpose, find your mission. Why are we here? What do we have to give, each of us? What do we have to give others? That's what's important. That's the only thing that's going to truly make us happy. What are our values? What's close to my heart? What is it that, I have that's really important in my values that I want to hold dear to, that I want to take with me into the next millennium? What are those core values that are most important? And even though we're looking to the future, the only power is in the present, being right here, right now. This is the moment. We can learn from the past, we can look to the future, but right now, we're creating our future. Right now, we're creating our future karma. We're going to live out tomorrow the causes we set in motion today. When we were with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, we were talking to him about China. People can't understand how he can't be angry at the Chinese, and although they destroyed his people and his culture. And as he was saying to us, the causes of this were set in motion over 1,000 years ago. He sees the big picture. We set causes in motion today that we're going to reap the fruits of in the future. So we're always worried about what we did in the past and what it means today. What's my karma from the past? We need to see what we're creating for the future right now, and create a new and a better future for ourselves. Because energy follows thought. What we're thinking, how we're relating to each other today. And I think what's really key for the future is some type of inner reflective practice, whether it's a reflective prayer or meditation, taking inner quiet time to go inside, to check in with our spiritual source inside each of us. I think of anything I've learned over the last 25 years, and that first came to me when I lived at the Findhorn community in Scotland. Some of you may know of it. That's where Gordon and I met. That's where I first really deepened my spiritual path. And I learned there to meditate, to just take the quiet time, to develop a practice each day, to quietly turn within. And I feel there's nothing I've learned that's been more important in my life. I never could have gotten through a fire. I never could have gotten through a near-death experience with being very sick with a ruptured appendix and almost dying. If I hadn't learned to meditate, if I hadn't learned to take that quiet time each day, because it's really given me a sense of perspective, of inner knowing, of inner wisdom, and a sense that, I can learn from whatever crisis comes upon me, It's like it's given me that flexibility, that sense of inner calm and stability in the storm. So that's where we develop the confidence to deal with the problems that come up in our lives. Because really, trusting in God is the best insurance policy. That's where our real insurance comes from. And that's what I've learned. It isn't those outer policies that are going to get you through the hard time. It's that inner insurance policy. So, as we talk in the future, how we're going to face the new millennium, what we need to take with us to be effective and to have the kind of lives that will bring us the joy and the wisdom that we really want. These are the tools that I think will be most effective. Inner meditation, some kind of reflective practice, getting clear about our purpose, getting clear about what direction we're going in, the future that we want to create, and looking at how our thoughts create the future. We have a little handout there on mastering change, which I'll hand out. And then we'd like to take some time for questions and discussions, and then have time to break down into small groups so you can each interact with each other. Okay? So let's take a few minutes if there's questions or comments or things that you'd like to share. Okay? Yes?
I read in your bio that you're working on putting spirituality in politics. Can
Yes.
you talk a little bit about that and the success of your program in Washington?
Yes. In commenting on our successes in Washington, we always ask people, well, just take a look at the papers.
Are we being effective? I don't know.
Haven't we done a great job? I mean, working on politics in Washington is a very long-term project, and we are committed to a very long-term work here. What we try to do, we're doing a lot of different things. One of the things we do in the public arena is that we are trying to make it safe to talk about the spiritual dimensions of public policy. Right now there is kind of like a fear or an anathema about talking about spirituality in relationship to public policy. They'll talk about religion and about my religious beliefs, and I go to church, politicians will stand up and do that. But when you try to talk about what would be a deeper way of looking at these public policy questions, we always tend to band-aid all of our issues. We never try to go to, well, what is the cause of poverty? What is the cause of violence? We don't look at, well, what is the home life like? What are the values that are being perpetrated over the televisions, in the media? What are the psychological dimensions of living in extreme poverty and deprivation? How does that affect people's psyche? I mean, we don't work with those kinds of questions. We always want to sort of band-aid something, throw them in prisons, whatever. So we're trying to get people to think more deeply about the causes of the problems, and that there are spiritual approaches. And I don't mean just sitting and meditating, but I mean understanding that when there is a suppression of the spiritual part of our human nature, it will create problems. It will create tension, it will create pressure within, and ultimately that has to erupt in some way. And by having a totally secular culture, which pretty much denies the importance of the spiritual dimensions of who we are, we're setting ourselves up that all this energy and all this truth about our being has to come out in some form, in even distorted forms. I mean, gangs are a form of community. They're a form of ritual youth initiation. That's what gangs are about, because parents aren't there to initiate the youth into what it means to become a responsible adult, so other youth are trying to initiate them for each other. Doesn't work, because they don't know what they're trying to lead them into. That's an abdication on our part of the adult's relationship to the next generation. That's something we're all part of, because parents are working too, both parents are working full-time jobs because they have to have the money to keep maintaining the lifestyle, because, all these things are interconnected. So it's helping people to look at these problems in a much deeper way. That's one thing we do. We also look at, we go inside of government agencies, we do trainings in leadership, in conflict resolution, in team building, visioning work inside different government agencies to try to help change the culture inside the government.
Yeah, and we also have been doing a lot of courses in spiritual development, the ageless wisdom of East and West, looking at what is the essence of spiritual teachings in the major religions of the world, and how can it help us get in touch with our soul, our deeper spiritual self. And we train people in meditation and give them various tools and techniques that are helpful in spiritual growth. And then we also do a series of conferences. First was last year on spirituality at work, looking at what we call the double bottom line. Not just profits, but values are key as well. And it's the cutting edge in management right now is values-based, looking at values as a way to grow your company, to increase your profits. When employees feel their company is in line with their values, things that are important to them, something meaningful in their work, where they don't have to leave part of themselves at home, they can bring their whole self to work, body, mind, and spirit, they feel more engaged in the company. They make it work better, profits go up. So we had a number of people from different